This is the Soul-Filled Sisterhood podcast, and I'm your host, Nicole Burgess, licensed marriage and family therapist and an empowerment mentor for women. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute, nor is it to convey professional, psychological, financial, or medical advice. If you could use such services, please seek them out from someone you trust. Now here is today's episode. Episode 30. Today's episode is sponsored by Nicole Burgess, Empowerment Mentor. She helps the high-achieving, introverted, and sensitive female entrepreneur end the overwhelm and stressed out cycle, create more balance between her work and personal life, so she can have deeper connections not only with her partner, her children, but herself. Schedule your discovery call today. Go to NicoleBurgessCoaching.com/apply. Now here is today's episode. Well, welcome, sisters. I'm so excited about our conversation today. I have Amanda Hildebrandt, who is a relationship coach who focuses on delivering high-quality growth experiences for women who want to create more freedom and strength in their relationships. She draws upon her educational and professional experience as a licensed clinical social worker and as a somatic experiencing practitioner, as well as a deep personal connection to the power of transforming our relationship skills to foster a deep sense of self-worth and connection by ensuring women remove blocks to intimacy. Such an important topic. Amanda specializes in developing self-worth, empowering strong communication skills, teaching how to both learn and enact healthy boundaries with others, as well as giving women an insightful understanding of past experiences and their own personal attachment styles. Amanda uses a focus of mind-body skills and interventions to ensure clients have an integrated experience of these concepts and can execute them from a place of embodiment. Oh, Amanda, this sounds incredible. Thank you so much for being on today.
Thank you. Yeah, it does feel nice to hear that reflected back. That is good work.
It is. And it's such deep work that you do too. And I know, you and I have talked in another group that you and I belong to that there's so much with women and dating and the online world and how that's really changed some of this stuff for us. So would you mind sharing, before we kind of dive into all of that, what really got you into being a relationship coach?
Yeah, that is such a good question. And it's fun for me to think about at this point in my journey because this work is so near and dear to my heart, but from a very personal level. I have such a personal and professional connection to the content. I think the universe maybe slapped me a million times to try to figure this stuff out. And now at this point in the game, it's in more of a maintenance phase, which is such a fun place to be in rather than where I started off. So, I've been just completely inspired by doing this work with so many women alongside of me, yourself included. And I want to be able to continue to reach and connect with, as many women possible throughout my lifetime. And I think it's really interesting, just as I think about women in general, and a lot of us seek support for self-help and personal growth to support our capacity to deal with things that happened to us when we were much younger. And some of my own kind of personal experience, I think that shaped my difficulty with relationships later on, had to do with just being an incredibly sensitive young person, highly tuned into others. And I was paired up with a family that really didn't have much capacity to nurture emotions. I guess if you were to kind of score our family's emotional IQ or EQ at that time, just as a group, we would have been really failing. And it was such a mismatch for me personally, being someone who needed probably extra emotional guidance and support just due to how sensitive of a nervous system in a way I have of picking up on other people's stuff. So that coupled with kind of being a really chubby, awkward young person growing up, I was just incredibly tuned into watching people's acceptance of me related to kind of picking up cues. And there's so much, I think, that happens at a deeper level that our bodies are completely tuned into that we might not be paying attention to on a conscious level, but kind of watching for a certain eye gaze or a certain kind of maybe like a nod of approval or things like that. All that stuff I am, highly sensitive to, as probably most women are that connect with that sort of highly sensitive kind of archetype. So what that did, I think, over time was it just kind of created this gap between how I felt about myself and how I felt others were perceiving me. And a lot of this kind of ended up just being a lot of kind of aggregate self-worth kind of crap that I had to get through in order to kind of be on the other side now. So I think my family on the one hand was awesome. I have a lot of cool traits about me. I'm fiercely independent. I'm a smart person. I'm a humorous person. I'm really driven, but I also, had to move through kind of a lot of toxic shame, trouble speaking up, a natural self-protective response, which I can go into later, of kind of a default freeze mode. Lots of shutdown in my system and a tendency for my own needs and wants to take a back seat. So I think what was so interesting was kind of having this pattern growing up and just who I am as a person. I got really connected into kind of a large community of helpers and healers. I knew I wanted to be a social worker from the time when I was very young, just doing a lot of volunteering and kind of giving back. And I think there's a lot of women out there that connect with kind of a therapist, nurse, teacher, body worker, acupuncturist, acupuncturist or coach type mentality that kind of we have that in common with each other, this kind of healer helper background. And sometimes that comes from a place of kind of caregiving for others. And that can both have its pluses and minuses, as I'm sure you know, on a deep level. But I think the fun part of choosing that as my profession for me to kind of wrap it all up and bring it all around is I've heard this cute saying that research is me search. I don't know if you've heard that.
I have
before.
not. Huh?
Yeah. But basically, spending all that time in grad school and extra programs and extra learning opportunities allowed me to completely understand myself. And there's a reason why I was obsessively going back to extra training programs and wanting to keep helping women and wanting to keep showing up for others, because part of me needed to understand myself better. Like, why is all this stuff so dang hard for me? At the end of this, fast forward to now, I'm sure there's still exponentially a lot of growing that could happen and will happen. But, at this place, I consider myself more in the maintenance phase, and it just feels like a very mission-driven spiritual connection I have with other women that I find that struggle with the same pieces. And I love getting pulled together and in connection with these people and kind of helping them identify with their own natural capacity to heal, their own natural kind of powerhouse of energy, all of their gifts that, they innately have. And that just feels like the most perfect thing I could be doing with my time. So
I love it. Well, and I think you've hit on some really good points too. In episode 17, I talk about limiting beliefs, and that you really touched on that as when you're going through your grad school and you're going through all those voluntary experiences you have, that you sought to seek your own personal understanding and really work through some of those limiting beliefs, that mindset stuff that can really, sometimes I call it the head trash that loves to get into our way. And it impacts not just, personal stuff, but professional stuff. And what we're talking about today is it can really, truly impact if you're looking to find your ideal mate. It can really mess up stuff within that unless you know more about yourself and work through those things.
Yeah, that is such a good transition, because I think dating is especially where a lot of this stuff goes wrong. Dating and intimate relationships is kind of like the Olympics of relationship issues. Like, so a lot of us pass, when we do our little 5K, like coworker interactions. But if we can't figure this stuff out, I think most of the time it kind of comes to a head in our intimate relationships for sure. So
Well, so, Amanda, I'm curious because you've really honed in on this for years now, really working with women and their relationships and dating. What are some of the issues you typically see women struggle with regarding whether it's dating or it's, or the online world? What are some of those, I guess, top issues you see or hear about?
Hmm. That's a great question. And I'm kind of having all these beautiful images of women I've worked with in the past kind of flood my mind. And I think the common thread between what most of them would describe to me is just kind of there was just a lot of uncertainty with knowing their own reality and being able to
Mm.
speak up and find people that could really fulfill their needs and wants in relationships. I think is the biggest way to kind of zoom out from that theme that was going on, and just feeling like they would connect with people, but they would not really be themselves. They would be some other version of
Aha.
themselves dating. Yeah.
Gotcha. So that's what I was going to ask you to like clarify a little more, like, this not really being who they are. Could you say just a little bit more about, how they, I know it is a common theme for not only women, but for men too, sometimes putting on
Hmm.
this mask of trying to like, ooh, I got to totally impress or whatever comes through their mind. Share a little bit more of like what you hear from women about what they try to do during those dates.
I think some of the biggest thing is kind of hiding who they are initially. So
Hmm.
someone will be asking these very pivotal questions in terms of, or even I guess in terms of, life plans. And I've known women who are clients and friends and myself who were even scared to say out the get go, like, I'm hoping to have a long term relationship. I think
Yeah.
some people thought it'd be easier to sound like they're kind of a go with the flow girl. And they're like, well, I'm open for anything. I just want to
Yeah.
see what happens. But that's not true. Like a lot of women I've worked with really just wanted a long term relationship, whether it was going to be with that person. That was the part that was unknown. But
Hmm.
they knew that when they were sitting around chatting with their girlfriends, and something gets lost in translation by the time they're on a date with someone. And then they're all of a sudden pretending that, oh, whatever happens, happens. I can just go with the flow on that. So I think really like leaving their own basic needs and wants behind and showing up as kind of someone who has none of those things. They're a blank slate essentially for the other person to kind of fill and color in as they go. And this could look like with even, how you choose the first date, like what restaurant should we go to?
Hmm.
Someone could have been like, had a strong preference for a certain type of food and found themselves like at a completely different restaurant ordering stuff they would never choose to eat because they just kind of want to be this blank slate, like I said, for this other person to kind of help define them. But if you were to catch that person on their own or with a really close friend, maybe they would know completely what the heck they wanted to eat, or, what kind of relationship they wanted, or anything like that.
And so what I'm hearing you say is let that woman show up. Let her
Hmm.
fully be there and state her needs and her wants. And if the person that you're going out on that date with, if it's not a match, that's okay. Maybe it'll end up being a friendship, but not a long-term relationship, and so be it. But it's like
Hmm.
being able to show up fully of who you are, knowing that about yourself, right? And then not worrying about the outcome or trying to so-called take care of the other person,
Hmm.
which is the people pleasing behavior. It's like, hey, you know what? They're an adult too. They can take care of themselves just as I can take care of my own self.
Hmm. Yeah, and something really gets lost in translation. I had someone mention the phrase fail fast at one point, and that really stuck to me a few years ago when I was dating and trying to get out there. And I think that's such a much better motto to use, that if this is going to fail, let it fail within the first week,
Yes.
month. This doesn't need to fail, 6 years in. So,
Yes. I love that. Yes. I love
yeah.
it.
Hmm.
Well, would you mind sharing a little more because you do also have the training in like the somatic experiencing and you talk so much. I know when you and I've talked together, you talk quite a bit about, really helping women with boundaries and stuff. How do those things or do they even connect? I'm guessing there is a connection there to that mind and
Hmm.
body, but how do you work within that realm of it?
Yeah, so somatic experiencing is a beautiful model that Peter Levine created. And what it is it's essentially using our physiology combined with the power of psychology to renegotiate traumatic events of any level. They could be a small, overwhelming event all the way up to something larger, but to literally support the nervous system to allow that kind of traumatic energy or that shock energy or that kind of held self-protective response energy. And I can get more into the nitty-gritty later if it feels relevant, but to allow that to kind of cycle out of the body so we no longer have these pre-planned patterns within our body. For example, when I think about it with boundary issues, I can give a really beautiful example, kind of giving a story about a client I had. So I worked with this really fantastic woman for a while, and she came from a family where her mom was more unstable. She dealt with mental illness when she was younger. And so this client had the tendency of kind of, watching very clearly for when her mom would be okay or when her mom would have more difficulty. And so she would kind of be more squelching her own kind of desires, needs, and wants, and what's okay with her, what's her bottom line. None of that mattered, because as a child, essentially, if our parents don't have us, if they don't keep us going, like, we are not okay. That's our survival at that point in our life. And so children will make every adjustment on their part, if they can, to hide whatever they need to have happen at that moment. They can put that aside, all for the greater good, which is staying within the familial context and being included. And that is a gift that children have, that sometimes some adults carry that pattern into adulthood, which is what we need to correct. And because it really no longer serves us typically as an adult, despite that being kind of like a life-saving adaptation that we could do sometimes as children. So like from her case, she really had kind of a completely buried kind of self-protective response. So if someone was kind of crossing a boundary, she and I were working very closely while she was dating kind of a toxic partner, and she was allowing him to kind of dictate all the terms of the relationship. She was not speaking up for herself. She was not really saying, when they would meet or when they would be sexual. She was just going with the flow completely. But it came from this place for her of having that pattern created from a very young age, where it wasn't really safe to speak up and say what she needed or wanted or what was okay with her or not, because she had to do everything she could just to kind of go with the flow. So what we needed to do was essentially allow her body to experience boundaries in kind of the smallest titration possible. So what we would do is we would take bite-sized chunks and work on it together within our relationship to kind of undo that patterning and help her body restore to more of a natural boundary experience. So what we would do is a ton of experiential stuff, and people can even practice this with like a friend or someone they really trust or know. But essentially we would kind of stand, this is a really beautiful intervention that comes from SE, or from somatic experiencing. We would stand across the room from each other, and my instructions to her were, when I get too close, let me know to stop. And I would kind of slowly take a few steps towards her. And what ended up happening was I was like almost nose to nose with her, and she still hadn't said anything. Like, we were really too close, like even beyond my capacity to be close with someone. And so what that was completely important for us to understand, because her boundary system was she was completely disconnected from like the intuition or the alarm bell that would go off in her body that would then execute the motion of saying like, that's enough, stop, and even put out that arm gesture of like, stop, that's close enough. But what we did was we kind of worked through her fear, and ultimately what arose in that time working together in this dynamic was she had so much fear of speaking up for herself, because she was never in relationships that allowed that. She was afraid that if she did that, she could be left on her own, which is scary as a child and doesn't need to be so scary when we're an adult. So we were able to kind of allow her nervous system to discharge some of that fear and some of that kind of shutdown response. And she was able to start, setting boundaries with this dating partner by us gradually working on that week after week for a while, and just letting her body become good at, which we're all designed to be good at boundaries. So we just had to let her body be good at it again and be able to say, that's close enough, Amanda. And she got pretty good at it. But what it did is it directly translated to her capacity to enact that now with a dating partner, which is really beautiful. But that's kind of one of my favorite examples of how I've woven that work together.
Well, I love it. And it's extremely powerful because as you talk about, it's the mind body connection. And what I like to say is you go even deeper because you're reconnecting her back to her soul. And when she's able to tap into that, as you said, she can tap more into that intuition and she's fully in alignment then, right? And she's able to say, okay, I can listen to that. I don't need to shut that part of me off because I'm doing something else. Again, as self-preservation as a child, I'm now an adult. I don't need to continue with that same belief and I don't need to continue with that same behavior. Beautiful example.
Yeah, it's really fun stuff. And that's, essentially if someone's dealing with a modern day boundary issue, they're finding themselves either becoming too rigid with other people, walling people off, or allowing for people to kind of come in at a really kind of intrusive rate and not protect themselves very much, then this is something that we have to dig a little bit deeper and say, okay, how can we support this? And for some people, just knowing about what boundaries are and practicing it little by little, they can start to grab onto it and they can start to have wins with even small situations. Like sometimes I will encourage people, in a small situation to just watch their distance between themselves and another person in the grocery line. And if that person gets a little bit close, to practice something like, hey, can you give me a little bit more room while I put my groceries up? And for some people, they can do these small wins until they're able to kind of really translate that work into an intimate relationship, which, like I said, tends to be the Olympics of, like relationship stuff.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and I love that. It's, if you're going to do a marathon, you just don't run a marathon. You have to gradually work your way up to that. And that's exactly what you're talking about. It's like, if you want to go to the Olympics and get into the intimacy piece of it, you need to learn or relearn some of these skills. It's kind of what I like to say is you unlearn stuff that no longer serves you, right? And you're learning these skills that do. And I want to kind of segue then into this online dating world because it has really changed things, at least in my opinion, over the years where, okay, you used to go onto a website and you would create kind of a profile, which there's a lot of those that are still around. But now there's also different apps where I know you have done a lot of posting with, swiping right or swipe left type of thing, because it's like, okay, what is this about? Where it seems like there's some mixed messages or there's so many different ways to do this now. And what are some of the ways that women could really, I guess, first kind of talk about the online world and then really helping with the boundary setting regarding whatever they use to do these dates?
Yeah, that is such a fascinating topic because I think when it comes to online, like you're saying, it went from something a lot more time consuming and it required a lot more thought. I'm thinking back to my early days when I used to see people kind of start online dating back when it used to even be taboo. You didn't really even want to mention like, oh, I have a profile. And it's not that way anymore, but it used to be that way. But it used to be more profiles like Match or eHarmony, where someone had to sit down and really kind of pour their heart out. And now we've moved all the way to the opposite end of the spectrum, which is, something like Tinder, which all you need is like a picture. And maybe if you can put 150 characters in there, then you're all ready to go. But the problem is that's really problematic from a relational standpoint.
Yeah. I didn't realize it was only like 150 characters. Holy cow.
Yeah. I'm probably a little unclear on how much exactly, but essentially like
very little.
Probably at this point you could like pop a few emojis in and you're like ready to go. So we've really kind of like shortchanged the process of how quick it is to get to know someone, which I feel like there's kind of almost like a buffet syndrome when it comes to dating now. And I don't know if anyone else has problems with a buffet, but whenever I don't go to buffets for this reason, because when I go, it's just too much overwhelm and you're like
Mm-hmm.
picking everything and you feel like you need like to go back a million times, or what if you didn't try this dish and got to save room for dessert because you never know what that might taste like. But I feel like that translates a little bit to the options in regards to what's available or what we perceive to be available online. And so it really, makes us kind of, I think, it's just mixing up everything we ever dealt with relationally when it came to dating. There's just, the whole process is different now. And I think we're kind of still trying to understand that. But something I think that's really interesting when it comes to dating specifically is we can literally start an entire relationship with someone without ever having met them in person. And I've known women, myself included, who would feel very connected to this person, but they might have only ever texted that person
Mm-hmm.
or, read kind of a little bit of information about them, which may or may not be the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we do not have like an in-person context with someone, it's really hard to do any reality testing. It's really hard to rely on our body's mechanism to kind of suss out, like a real person from a fake person. Our body works so much better. All of our natural protective responses that are built into our body that keep us safe are designed for face-to-face contact. They do not work over text, which is why it's so easy to like mess up a text with
Mm-hmm.
someone and, have a fight because no one understood the tone, because we need the facial micro expressions. We need the
Mm-hmm.
tone of voice. We need the body posture. We need to know energetically how that person feels next to us, all while they're delivering the message. And our body's just not designed to understand, to make heads or tails from, a text conversation. So we're kind of cutting out our body's best sense of keeping us safe by trying to create relationships via text. And I think it's really problematic when people go about it from that standpoint.
And I love, this is just such a beautiful reminder, Amanda, because you've hit it. Trying to sidestep again the process of dating, of slowly getting to know one another. And I love that reminder that our body really is more like that radar, like you're saying. It takes the verbals with the nonverbals. And
Mm-hmm.
you can, sometimes we call it that sixth sense that both women
Mm-hmm.
and men have, that
Mm-hmm.
it's just like something feels kind of off, something's not right. And yeah, texting, I typically will tell my clients that's the least best way to communicate with somebody. I'm like, if you want to
Yeah.
scale it, it's like texting is the worst. And then you can
Mm-hmm.
go to email, and then you go to voicemail out, and then you're in
Mm-hmm.
person. I'm like, your
Mm-hmm.
number one is being in person. And that's exactly what you're talking about. So yes, it may be really quick to do the swiping or to meet somebody or to send text, but you're missing the actual boundaries that can naturally happen and unfold when you're talking with somebody in person that way. And again, tuning into your body, like you're saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such an easy kind of trap to like let fantasy take over us and kind of create this person in our mind as to how we
Mm-hmm.
believe they might be. And when we just read a profile, our mind will quickly start filling in the gaps. And we've almost decided yay or nay before we've even kind of like checked that person out with ourselves. And that's such a far cry from how we used to date. Maybe we'd see someone around town for a while and then we'd have like a shared experience in common. We'd both be invited to the same party. And then maybe someone would start to ask a little bit about us and then they would get feedback from someone else who knows us. And we would just start to build the case slowly, the bio, the demographics, all that over time. And then, eventually it would maybe be like a conversation and then asking for a phone number and everything about that, I think lended itself to a lot more kind of reality testing, just getting a sense of who this person is. You have other people to help vet you and understand, or you can kind of vet that person because you have all these third party validations about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds really, kind of almost cold to think of it that way, but that's really how we could establish trust, because there is a whole community of people kind of fact finding about each other and understanding who we all are. And now, you can start a relationship with someone across the world and essentially, make a lot of life decisions or ideas about the relationship without even ever having any, you know, um, kind of information that that person really is who you think they are. So it's
Yeah.
really kind of a dangerous thing. That being said, I'm sure there's like a million beautiful stories of people who do it in a more thoughtful way. And I know tons of people who've had successful relationships that way. And I think it can be done in a more successful way when people are willing to do it in kind of a more slowed down, thoughtful process. So,
And what you're also talking about, those tips of just like kind of, I'll call them, I have air quotes going on right now, the old fashioned way in air
yeah.
quotes, it is that stepping up process, but it's so much, it is the slowing everything down and getting to know. And so, yes, you can totally meet somebody online, but you're both being very intentional. It's not only through text, it's not only through email. Because of technology, you really can do video chats together so you can start to see one another that way. And eventually, maybe you can create that space where you're truly in the same room at the same time type of thing. But
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be a progression of that versus like what we were kind of chatting about just a few minutes ago is the fantasy that can truly get created in your mind going, oh my gosh, they sound so great through text or through email. And it's like, yeah, but do you really know them? No, you don't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sometimes on the flip side, for people who trend more towards feeling more comfortable by themselves, they might have more of a certain attachment template. That means that they just truly feel a lot more comfortable when they're a little bit more of a loner. I found some of those types of clients or even some of those types of girlfriends, sometimes the online dating world is almost too much information for them because they can read a little line on a profile and dismiss someone, or someone writes back in the wrong way and they say, they send this bit of information and that person is more than happy to cut them off and not have to ever challenge themselves with really being with another person. And so they're like more than happy to find these faults in people because it reaffirms their sense of it's not really safe or easy to connect with other people and I have to continue to be on my own. So it can kind of go both ways too. I think it can keep people latched on to folks that aren't that great. And then also for some, keep them pretty shut down and isolated.
Yeah. And both of those, right, are mindsets. They're those limiting beliefs. And what we're talking about is really one, being aware of that, and then two, challenging it. It's like for
Yeah.
us to grow, right, personally in any relationships or in any professional arena, you got to step outside that comfort zone too and really challenge that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what are some, I guess, ways or tips? I know you gave that beautiful example of the boundary with a previous client. What are some other tips that you typically kind of help women with when it comes to this online dating world, or when they begin to go into, they're training for the Olympics because they really truly know they want more intimacy in their relationship? What are some other things that our listeners can kind of begin to look at or explore for themselves?
That's a really nice question. I think something I love working with people on is helping them understand their own attachment kind of adaptations. And what I like to have people do when we work together is almost create an owner's manual about themselves where they
Ooh.
start to learn. Like if I were to go buy a new coffee pot, I'm the type of person, because of the way my dad taught me, I need to like devour the owner's manual and learn like, how do I clean this thing? How do I store it? What kind of coffee filters do I need? What do I do when it needs to be, washed versus like a deep cleaning? And I read that thing and it comes with an owner's manual. And I want women and clients that I work with, men too, sometimes, to just have a really fabulous handbook of how to operate themselves. And one of the biggest
I
things
love that.
yeah, isn't that a sweet idea?
Yeah.
One of the biggest things I think that comes into play relationally is any of our attachment kind of stuff. And so, we can have different types of attachment style. We can feel really hesitant about connecting with people. We can feel more often than not really secure, or we can prefer to be really detached from people and find it a lot more comforting to just be on our own. And so I want people to know a little bit about their tendencies in that way, because that is just information to download directly into their owner's manual. So they know, for some women, they might feel some discomfort as they're getting to know new people. They might have met someone online and then are out on a date with them and they're feeling discomfort, but we need to question that, knowing their attachment style, if they're often feeling uncomfortable by closeness. So we can't always take that as face value that person's a mismatch. This might just be outside of their comfort zone in terms of having someone really see them and know them. And that's why it's so good to kind of have like an objective support person and to have our owner's manual ready to go as we're starting to date, because we need to be ready to know, what is it like for me to be in relationship? How do I know that this is really a deep red flag about this person's character? Or how do I know when it's my stuff and I'm just feeling a little bit nervous about someone really learning who I am and I feel a little bit on the spot and someone's really seeing me? And so I think weaving in attachment components, in addition to the boundary stuff, helps people start to tease out some of those different components, and they can kind of fumble through. I wish it was easy. I wish it was like a lot easier, but at best, someone who's going to be working on this stuff is going to start fumbling. But instead of completely kind of crashing and maybe shutting down from the whole dating experience, it's so cool when someone can stay in the game, keep kind of fumbling through, staying connected, but being really like vulnerable and authentic about what's going on for them. And that's how you start to tease out the difference between, someone not being a good fit for us and maybe just when we're uncomfortable really getting close with other people.
Yeah. And what you're talking about, really, it's the power of self-reflection. And I know when I had started this podcast, right? So it's my very first episode, in episode 1, I talk so much about raising your own self-awareness, but it starts with every person on this planet. If you want things to be different in your life, you have to pause and go within. And what you're saying is, oh yeah, we're going to totally mess things up, but that's part of our process as we unlearn things that no longer work for us and begin to discern. It's like, oh yeah, does this really work? Or no, it was just me, because I'm like, dude, he got really close and that's just me going, oh, they're inside my bubble. And I need to say, could you take a step back for a moment? Let me get to know you just from there. Let's do this, which is all okay. That's how you continue to grow and get those things that you want in life, because you're more fully in alignment with what you're wanting and doing.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful summary. It's nice having my ideas reflected back in this beautiful package.
Well,
Thank you.
You offer so many great tips on this, that it's, learning your boundaries, but it is also about the attachment. And part of what this attachment is, what was that, you learned from your parents, or how close with that relationship was. And then what did you embody? And then as you get older, like, do you want to continue with this, or do you want to modify or shift those? And they can truly change. You really can heal those past wounds so that you can more be fully into your relationships in a healthy way. And again, I really love your analogy of this is really going to the Olympics. You're training for the Olympics of being in intimacy. I love that analogy.
Going to say something you said was so beautiful, because have you heard the saying where people are like, I just got to do me for a little bit. I can't date until I get myself right.
Yes.
I hate that, because we will only ever heal relationship stuff in the context of a relationship. We do not typically do much on our own. And so something you said just made me kind of think about that. And it's so fun when people are willing to test it out and try it and get messy and figure it out, but with another human, because that's where the repatterning, that's where we can like live or leave some of the old stuff behind. Like, we have to experience a new normal for our body to stop responding to whatever happened when we were younger, or, kind of earlier in our life. And so I'm just so glad you hit on that, because I think it's really one of my core tenets in my coaching program is you cannot win at this stuff. You cannot train for the Olympics sitting in the bleachers.
Exactly. And it's so, and I'm giggling only because I'm nodding my head. Yeah, and you can't see it, but I'm nodding my head. Yes, because it is so powerful. We really can't grow more unless we're truly in relationship. And whether that's dating, peer relationships, work relationships, friend relationships, parent relationships, whatever that is, that's where the growth happens. And that's
Mm-hmm.
also where the healing can happen.
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
I love it. Well, I'm curious, before we truly wrap up here, Amanda, I've got one more question for you, because we touched a little bit about some vulnerability. And I'm curious, as you were going through this whole dating thing for you, and I know you're in a healthy relationship now, and one that you just, what do I want to say? You just smile from ear to ear when you talk about it and show pictures of
Mm.
it, of your relationship. How did you manage your feelings of vulnerability? So as you went through these different dating scenes and different dates, and you really unlearning some of the stuff that you used to do when you were a kiddo, and now you're like, nope, I'm an adult woman, I want to do this differently. How did you kind of manage all of that so that you could stay more grounded and stay within your own body as you went through this?
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about where I am now versus all the stops along the way that it took. And I am so grateful for, like I said, dedicating myself to a career that just unbeknownst to me actually turned into exactly what I needed to get better at life. And
Mm-hmm.
I will say that it's transformed, some of the personal work I've done, especially in the somatic experiencing program. It's just transformed like my relational capacity to be with people, which has impacted everything, how to be with friends differently, family differently, with clients differently, with really everyone. And it
Mm-hmm.
allowed me to actually allow in a really freaking awesome like partner, which I hadn't done up until now. And we've been together almost 2 years, but he's really, I could say, one of the first successful, well, the only successful relationship I've had. But what had to happen to kind of manage everything that was going on with how scary that was for me to let him in was, one thing I will say is I watched like a hawk my own tendency to feel
Mm-hmm.
less than or better than with him. And that comes down to self-worth a million times over, because I had to watch anytime I felt like not enough, or when I actually felt like had an inflated sense of myself. And I had to watch myself doing that internally, which
Mm-hmm.
was some sort of an awareness thing that pops up. And I had to get myself back, either bring myself back up to, I'm okay, you're okay with him. Like, we are
Mm-hmm.
just two humans trying to figure this out together, and to stay relational and to stay in that space of, sometimes it felt more like tension to not get resolution right away on an issue. But I
Mm-hmm.
had to grow my capacity to be in the muckiness and to not just like peace out when things got difficult, or pick people who could never meet me in this space. And so, like, I watch like a hawk when I feel my self-worth drop, or when it feels inflated and I'm maybe talking over, interrupting him, or trying to tell him like it is. So I watch those things and I get myself back to being like relational with him, which is what Pia Melody calls like, I'm okay, you're okay. We are like two humans in this relationship trying to figure it out. And let's just stay in connection while we figure out what's going to be comfortable for us to kind of navigate this. And it took, I mean, a lot of coaching, a lot of fantastic mentors and coaches helped me repattern my own stuff so I
Mm-hmm.
could show up with him in that way. For me, when I would set a boundary with someone, there would be this wave of anxiety and fear that would kick in afterwards if I would try it out. And I had to learn to manage that and kind of allow some of the old fear to settle out of my system, so I could manage how uncomfortable it felt to really set a boundary with someone. So for me, that was paramount to work on that stuff behind the
Mm-hmm.
scenes. I still work on that stuff behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
I talk to him about it
Yep.
sometimes, and he's such a cheerleader for both my growth, and he's doing his own stuff to keep growing too, because you bet yourself $1,000,000 that I challenge every aspect of his attachment system and boundaries too, and self-worth. And I have that amazing capacity of getting right under his skin, just like he does mine. But
Mm-hmm.
I've got someone who's like in it with me, and we
Yeah.
stay in connection together while we figure this stuff out now, which is great.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing your journey, because I think this is paramount that you were with somebody as your tanks, like that you're both willing to step into the messiness. That's life, right? Things don't
Mm-hmm.
not always come along. Woohoo, that was smooth sailing. Sometimes yes, but a lot of times, oh my gosh, that's where the growth is. And both of you being so intentional for keeping the communication open about all of
Mm-hmm.
that. That's another key in a healthy relationship, is being able to have that dialogue and slowing things down. And what you said too, of really sometimes feeling the tension because your own stuff can come up, and that sometimes you're not going to get it resolved right there in that next 10 15 minutes. It may have to wait for another day or two before it's like, okay, all right, things are still okay, and we can talk about this more, and the world didn't come to an end. But it's, yeah, that tension sometimes is really, that's the growth process, to go old belief to new belief.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yep. Beautifully
very
put.
powerful,
Mm-hmm.
very
Yeah.
powerful. Well, I want to let people know that if they want to find out more about you, they can go out to your website, which is worthyoflovecoaching.com. And don't worry, everybody, I will have that on my show notes. And I also want to let you know that Amanda has this incredible Facebook group that is open to all. And again, that link is going to be in the show notes, and you can go in there and you can see her trainings, her tips. She's got tons of inspirational content and ideas on how to really grow your capacity to show up in a high quality relationship on a daily basis. So, Amanda, I just want to say thank you so much for being on today, sharing your wisdom. And I know we only scratch the surface of things, but you have great information, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Nicole. It's been so sweet to watch your journey, and to be a part of it today was really, really a blessing for me to kind of have this time with you. So thank you very much. So nice.
If you are a high achieving, introverted, and sensitive entrepreneur, I invite you to go out to my Facebook group. You go out to Introverted, Sensitive Women Achievers. Thank you so much for listening.